The Chicago Bears 2024 schedule is odd. You start with 3 AFC South teams in a row, and then a bunch of your NFC North division games are all packed together in the second half of the season, and yet it still feels like Caleb Williams has a reasonable path to finishing above 500 his rookie season.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on all of your favorite social media platforms, including the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can click that subscribe button to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. On the show today, we slice and dice and dissect this Chicago Bears 2024 schedule. Now that we know the order of the games, the time of the games, the home and away splits in what order and where on the schedule, and when the bye week is and all that good stuff, we'll kind of look at some of the interesting and strange stretches in here that just are quirks of a schedule and how this sort of plays out with where this Bears team is right now. And we'll go through some of the easier games, some of the tougher games, a number of revenge games on this schedule as well. And then we'll wrap up going through our predictions on how this Bears team is going to finish week by week and what kind of outcomes we foresee them winning and losing across the stretch of this schedule. But like right away, when the schedule comes out, a few things jump out at you. First of all, you start the season with 3 straight games against AFC South opponents, opening at home against the Titans, then going on the road at the Houston Texans on, I think, Sunday Night Football, if I remember. It's primetime, it's either Sunday or Monday, and then on the road against the Indianapolis Colts. It feels rare to play 3 teams in the same division in back-to-back-to-back weeks, let alone to start the season. So right away, that jumps out at you. Of course, week 6 against the Jacksonville Jaguars in London is the big, lost home game by the Bears this year. It counts as a home game, but you're, I guess, in a neutral site in London, but should be exciting one. Having the bye week right after that, of course, gives you a nice break for guys to readjust to coming back to being stateside for a little bit of an easier stretch after that bye week, which is nice. And then from week 11 on, you have 5 division games in 6 weeks, 5 NFC North games in 6 weeks. Home against the Packers, home against the Vikings, and then at Detroit on Thanksgiving. Then you got the 49ers in between, and then 2 more divisional games at Minnesota. I think that's a Monday night game, and then at home against Detroit. But it's like Green Bay, Minnesota, Detroit, 3 in a row. Then you get the 49ers, and then 2 more divisional games right after that with the Vikings and the Lions. And, of course, you always finish the season with a divisional game. And once again, we're doing this on the road in Green Bay for Week 18. So, those were kind of the biggest areas that jumped out at me right away on this schedule. If you just sort of look surface level, okay, what are some of the immediate things that stand out there? I certainly think Tennessee in Week 1 is, I would say, a favorable opponent to start against. That's a game that feels very winnable for Caleb Williams' first career start. I mean, they were 6-11 last season. A lot of turnover on that coaching staff. First-time head coach. I think not a first-time offensive coordinator, but someone who hasn't been an offensive coordinator in a long time and not at the NFL level, and inexperienced defense. It's generally an inexperienced coaching staff and a roster that doesn't feel super strong and super deep. So it feels good to be able to start off with something a little bit more manageable in Tennessee. It's not the easiest game on the schedule, but it's not anywhere close to the hardest game on the schedule either. So then you get exciting game of CJ Stroud, the battle of young quarterbacks there with the Texans. That'll be fun. Then you get the Matt Eberflus revenge game with the Colts. And we'll talk about some of the other revenge games throughout the schedule. But all in all, it's interesting. I don't think it's like a quote unquote bad schedule or a quote unquote good schedule. But I do feel like we've seen the Bears the last couple of seasons under Matt Eberflus generally start seasons a little bit on the slow end and turn things around after the bye week, and especially in the second halves of seasons. And so when I look at this Bears schedule, it generally tends to be teams I think of as less formidable early on, and then more difficult teams later on. And that, if the Bears are still going through some learning curves with, Caleb Williams working with new receivers, right, and everyone trying to get on the same page, I would rather do that against a team like the Titans in week 1 and the Carolina Panthers in week 5 and, the Commanders in week 8 and the Cardinals in week 9. Like, those are all teams that were picking in the top 10 of the draft, a number of them picking in the top 5 of the draft. I guess technically the Panthers weren't, but, they had the worst record in the NFL this season. Like, there's a handful of games in the first half of this season that you can kind of pencil in as should be wins for this Bears team. It's easier to pencil it in on paper in May than it is in the regular season, but like for now we can kind of say like, yeah, those are some relatively easier games to where if things are a little bit messy at first and the Bears need to adjust, at that bye week in week 7 or maybe even in the mini bye week after the Thanksgiving game in week 13, like at least some of the easier games come before that. So the Bears might not be at their best yet, but they're not playing their best opponents. And then later in the season, when we've seen this Bears team in recent years really kind of hit its stride. It really in those teen weeks. It's 12, 13, 14, 15, 16-ish, right? That's when you're in the thick of your tight divisional games against Minnesota, Detroit, and maybe your toughest opponent on the schedule in the San Francisco 49ers on the road, albeit after you get a break on the mini bye week there, but still, like, perhaps your biggest opponent there, like, right in the thick of when your team is likely to be hitting its stride there and feeling like, okay, by that point, everyone is settled in, but you're not at the very end of the season where you feel like guys are just totally out of gas and are really kind of held together by duct tape and paper clips here. Like, I think you're still right in a nice sweet spot there. Like, again, weeks 12, 13, 14, maybe into 15 and 16. Like, that's kind of where where I would expect this Bears team to be closer to its peak. And that's when the more difficult games come. So that'll be a better test then, as opposed to, you play San Francisco in week 2 or 3, say, hypothetically. You really don't feel like you got much of a chance there, and they might smack you around a little bit, and you feel like, wow, the Bears didn't really get a chance to give that team their best punch, right? And so did you learn that much about them by losing to a really good team early on? It's like when the Bears played the Chiefs this past season in week 3, was it? And the Chiefs blew them out, and it was like, well, this is embarrassing, but what did you expect? It was the Chiefs, and you weren't playing particularly well. But if the second half of the season, Bears defense and Bears offense had played the Chiefs last season, maybe it's a slightly different story. And I'm not saying the Bears win the game, but I don't think it's a 41-10 blowout or whatever that final score was. So I think it makes the San Francisco game a little bit easier on there. And it's also worth noting, as you look at the timing of these home and away games, obviously a lot of away games early on in the stretch, but also the away games at the end are almost all in domes or warm weather climate. The Bears really only have one cold weather road game, week 18 at Green Bay. Like, I guess week 14 at San Francisco could be, it's not going to be balmy, perhaps. I don't actually know off the top of my head what day of where in the month week 14 is. I'm going to look it up here while I'm talking. But like, they're on the road at Detroit and at Minnesota in that stretch. Well, those are both, it might be cold outside, but those are going to be dome games in there. The 49ers game is December 8th. So, December in San Francisco it's certainly not December in Chicago. It'll be warmer there than it is here, but not, it's not Miami either, but you know what I mean? Like, so across that whole stretch, all of their outdoor road games are early on in the season. And towards the end of the year, it's at Detroit in a dome, at San Francisco in a warmer place, at Minnesota in a dome. And then week 18 at Green Bay is the one cold weather, bitter winter road game that, not that different from being at Soldier Field in terms of the climate there. So I think things generally work out nicely for the Bears in that regard in terms of weather and in terms of travel in some of those areas with the bye week after the London game as well. But there's a few games in particular in the schedule that I want to dive a little bit deeper on when it comes to thinking about how the Bears might do this season, and some of the tougher games that we might pencil in as harder losses maybe, and some of the easier games that we might pencil in as wins next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Gametime, the best way to get tickets for all of your favorite live events. I'm sure now that the schedule is out, you're planning your Bears games for this season, and you can already get tickets on the Gametime app. I'm pulling them up right now, and all of the Bears home games are available already for resale tickets. What I love about Gametime is that, first of all, you can see your view from your seat. So you're never going to have a bad seat now. So you're going to know exactly what you're going to get with your tickets. And they have all-in pricing, so you're not getting any fees added on at the end that make your tickets cost way more than you thought they would. I used Gametime to buy Bears tickets last season a couple different times. I used Gametime to buy my concert tickets as well, comedy shows. I mean, you name it, they've got it all on Gametime, and the ticket buying experience is so much better there than going through the other ticket brokers, so I really do use it all the time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Some games on the schedule right away jump out as like, ooh, that's going to be tough. And some games jump out on the schedule right away as like, ooh, that'll be easy. And then there's a few other games that add intrigue for some other reasons, whether it be exactly where they are on the calendar in terms of, prime time or standalone games, and then also games that might just mean a little something more to this Bears team, or at the very least, certain players on the Bears roster. So we talked about it a little bit, but I think about, the easiest games on the schedule is the one to pencil down as wins. I think the Titans, the Carolina Panthers, the Washington Commanders, and the New England Patriots are kind of the four worst teams that you feel like, okay, on the get-go, you're not guaranteed that all four of those are going to be wins, but you feel like, okay, those are teams that are not so threatening. I mean, the Titans were the best of the four of them last season. We already talked about the turnover they have at the head coach spot, and that's week one also, where it's like, you're not going to see the best version of the Titans, and you're not going to see the best version of the Bears, but given the Bears having a rookie quarterback and a brand new offensive coordinator, there's certainly an element of surprise there. I guess the Titans have a new coaching staff too, but a lot of the same roster, a lot of the same key pieces across that roster. So it's not like their skill sets are going to be a surprise to you, what they're able to do there. And then you go a little bit farther, week 5 in Carolina, like they were the worst team in the NFL last season. And they certainly, I think upgraded in terms of their coaching staff and added some nice pieces to that roster. But I'm not convinced that, Bryce Young is going to come in and all of a sudden light the league on fire. I think they'll be better than they were last year for sure. It's hard not to be much better than 2-15, but I'm not scared that, the Panthers are going to be some, dark horse sneaky playoff team. Like that feels a little bit too high for me. So I'm not going to say it's going to be an easy Bears win, but it should be something that's pretty manageable. Same kind of thing with New England, right? They draft Drake May, but they got Jacoby Brissett as the starter ahead of him. That game is not until week 10. So, okay, by week 10 is the rookie quarterback out there? Do we get a battle of the rookies, or will the Patriots coaching staff, Gerard Mayo and Alex Van Pelt, will they be stubborn about, no, we're sticking with the veteran quarterback. We want our rookie to truly sit for that full season. We're going to be, stubborn's not the right word, dedicated and hold strong to that, because Brissett's not a bad quarterback either. I just don't think they have the kind of talent that scares you. Last year they won 4 games. Again, they can win more than 4 this year. I mean, but I don't think they're a playoff team either. Maybe they win 6 or 7, kind of like the Bears did last season. But it's not a team that is going to take this huge jump forward in my eyes. And then what right after that, or no, a little bit before that, the Washington Commanders in week 8. And I haven't even mentioned the Arizona Cardinals in this conversation. I think they definitely are also around this mix of teams that were picking 1, 2, and 3. Panthers, Washington, New England, and Cardinals. Those are 1, 2, 3 for the 4 worst teams in the NFL draft are on the Bears schedule. And then the 7th worst team, the Titans, are on the Bears schedule. You should be able to beat all of those teams. The Commanders are going rookie quarterback, much like the Bears. I think they're a little bit behind the Bears in terms of the roster turnover and rebuild there. This is year 1 under that coaching staff, so I think there's going to be some more growing pains there than even what the Bears are experiencing. And then, the Cardinals didn't have Kyler Murray for a lot of last season, and that excuses some of their bad play. Murray himself was even only 3-5 last year, right? He probably wasn't 100% healthy, but I don't trust that coaching staff to be that good. So you got that nice stretch where it's bye week, Commanders, Cardinals, Patriots, that I could easily see being 3 wins in a row for the Bears. Just come on, whatever happens with the Jaguars in London, take a break after that, bye week, and then boom, beat the Commanders on the road, beat the Cardinals on the road, come back home and beat the Patriots, all in time to play the Green Bay Packers at home in week 11, which, by the way, Green Bay Packers will be coming off of a bye week for that week 11 game. Their bye week is week 10. They'll be fresh off a bye to play the Chicago Bears. But the Bears, on the other hand, could be on a 3 or 4 game or 5 game winning streak, depending on how great things go in Jacksonville, in London against Jacksonville. So they'll certainly be feeling confident in that regard. But Green Bay will be well rested and ready to go. So that to me is going to be interesting. I also noticed that the Bears are only one of two teams with a Week 7 bye week. It's just them and the Cowboys will be off that week. I'm surprised that they didn't condense it more, that they kind of some weeks had a bunch of player teams on bye week, but the Bears are one of the only teams with a Week 7 bye week. I know it's a little bit early on the schedule, but when you include the preseason, it kind of breaks it up into a nice third there, with the Thanksgiving game then being like the mini bye week. So it's like you play 6 games, then a bye week. Then I think you play 6 games, including the Thanksgiving game, and then you get the mini bye after going from Thursday to the following Sunday. And then you even get another Thursday game in Week 17 against the Seattle Seahawks to give you more time to prepare for Week 18 at the Green Bay Packers. And certainly those division games are all going to be really tough. But I think the other really tough games that jump out to me on this schedule, the San Francisco 49ers, we already talked about, I think, as on paper, the best team the Bears play on this schedule, and the team that I'm least confident in the Bears' ability to pull one out. Like with Caleb Williams being, as talented as he is, but also just the general like rookie quarterback is a wild card kind of conversation. I think most teams, you wouldn't be stunned if the Bears pulled off an upset and beat, the Rams. I think the Rams are one of the better teams on the schedule, but you're not going to be like, holy crap, can you believe the Bears beat the Rams? It's like, no, but surprise, but good win or whatever. But like the 49ers are the one where it's like, it's kind of like the Chiefs last year, right? It's like, it's hard for me to go in and be like, yeah, the Bears are going to pull off that upset. Like, no, we can pencil that one in as a loss with no real shame there, because a lot of teams are going to lose to the San Francisco 49ers because they're really good. So I think 49ers are the big one. The Texans, I think, are one of the best teams in the Bears schedule. I'll throw the Rams in there too, like playoff caliber team that is still, pushing for it. I know no Aaron Donald makes a big difference there, but like they were in the playoffs last year. They lost the Lions in a close one. Like that's a team that makes some real noise here. And as long as Sean McVay is coaching them, I'm not going to doubt their ability to turn things on, even when they go through some tough stretches like they did the first half of last season. But second half of last year, they won 7 of their last 8 games, and they got hot at just the right time. And fortunately, then this Bears-Rams game is week 4, so maybe they'll start slow and the Bears will get a better version of that. But I think that's another one of the toughest games in the schedule. And then, again, the division games. I think Detroit on Thanksgiving is tough. It's a short week. It's a short week for both teams. But Detroit, I think, is more used to that and more used to playing on Thanksgiving. And it's obviously also a home game for Detroit. And I feel like it's easier to do the short week at home. It's easier to do pretty much anything at home. But especially, I think, on the short week, having that in your home schedule so you don't have to have a travel schedule already cutting into your short week of preparation. So those to me, I'm not ready to say all 4 of those are lost. Certainly I'm not ready to say the Detroit game is for sure a loss. I think San Francisco is probably a loss. Houston, I just because it's week 2 for the Bears, it's early in that schedule. I don't think the Bears will be clicking on all cylinders by week 2, and I think Houston will be a little bit more of a well-oiled machine. So I think 49ers game's a loss for me. The Houston game is a loss for me. Rams is a little bit closer to a toss-up, but I still feel like the Rams were the better team last year, and until the Bears can prove to me that they're better, and until the Rams prove that they're worse, along the way, we got to see how those teams play out of the first 4 or 5 weeks. Then we'll get a better sense of how confident to be going into that matchup. But I find that to be one of the harder teams on the schedule here. Like when we talk about the non-conference games, or the non-division games, I should say, 3 difficult ones, 4 pretty easy ones, that puts you right around 500 in those games. And then for me, it's however they do in the divisional games in the NFC North will ultimately shape for me the difference between 8-9 season and 10-6 season. So we'll kind of go through these games and give some schedule prediction here about how things might go as we look on paper in May next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. And now that the NFL schedule is out, you can bet on how these games are going to go with our friends at FanDuel. Week 1, Bears-Titans. The Bears are 4.5-point favorites at home on FanDuel. The money line is Bears -240, and the early over-under is set at 43.5. So if you haven't used FanDuel, now is a great time to get some action in on these Bears games, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So you bet $5 on the NBA playoffs, the NHL playoffs, Major League Baseball season, any $5 bet. If your bet wins, you get the winnings for that $5 bet, whatever the odds were, and then they'll throw in an extra $150 in bonus bets on top of all that you can use to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. So to get your $150 in bonus bets, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. I'm not a big fan of trying to make a super firm, this is my official prediction for the Chicago Bears season. Lauren Cox and Locked On Bears says Bears will win blank number of games, lock it in, and then look back at the end, at the end of the year and say who had it right, who had it wrong. Because it's May. I think the Bears are still going to add a defensive lineman between now and week 1 that will change how I feel about the quality of the defensive line and perhaps then the quality of the defense and how that affects the team as a whole. I think this Bears team isn't at full strength yet or full talent yet. And so, but can I predict games assuming that they'll have, that veteran free agent defense, Unique Ngakoue or Calais Campbell or somebody like that back? Do I predict games as though they're going to do that, or do I predict games how they are now, right? And a lot of things change between now and then in terms of what teams that you think might be good now end up not being that good, and what teams you think are bad now end up being better than you might have thought them to. So it's a little bit hard for me to sit here and go all right, game by game, week 1 win, week 2 loss. I already Freudian slip there. I think I can do that for some games. We talked about, the easy and the hard ones are pretty easy to but then there's 5 or 6 other games that are kind of toss-ups for me at this point, where it's okay, I think the Bears will split a lot of those. And the division is really where I think I get the most stuck, because the Packers are good. The Lions are good. I think the Vikings are bad, but we'll see just how bad. And in the division, it's never easy enough to assume a sweep, even if you're pretty sure that one team is bad. Because the Bears almost beat the Lions twice last season, and no one thought the Bears could hang with the Lions last season. And so I don't want to just assume because the Vikings have J.J. McCarthy and Sam Darnold at quarterback that, those will be 2 easy wins. Probably, yes, but it's hard for me to really trust that, because, when have we been able to ever fully trust the Chicago Bears? So it's when I start thinking about the schedule, I find myself falling in a range okay, what does the worst case scenario look like? Or what the worst reasonable scenario look like? And what does the best reasonable scenario look like? And I think as I go through the schedule and I'm trying to be I'm obviously worst reasonable case is okay, important players get hurt and you lose all your games except for a couple. Sure, there's a nightmare scenario, but outside of the nightmare, but a realistic worst case scenario, I think is 7 wins. It's really hard for me to envision this team winning fewer than 7 games, because I think you'll beat the Titans in week 1, you'll beat the Panthers in week 5, you'll beat the Commanders in week 8, the Cardinals in week 9, the Patriots in week 10, and then at least 2 division games, whether that's the Vikings twice or 1 Vikings, 1 Packers, or 1 Vikings, 1 Lions. That gets you to 5. That gets you to 7 wins right there, is beating Titans, Titans, Panthers, Commanders, Cardinals, Patriots are 5 non-division games, and then a couple division games get you to 7 wins. To me, that feels pretty easy. And even if you lose to the Titans or one of those 5 bad teams, you might sneak a win against the Colts or the Rams or the Jaguars or the Seahawks, that are teams that I think are all kind of borderline for me. So to me, it's really hard to envision a scenario where the Bears are healthy relatively and win fewer than 7 games. Now, 7 games is the number of games they won in 2023. So that would be a disappointment for the first season of Caleb Williams and for the 3rd year of Matt Eberflus. But I think at a minimum, it's 7 games. You start to go optimistic best case scenario, it's easy to kind of get carried away. It's okay, if you say the toss-up games lean Bears, then okay, so you beat the Titans, you beat the Colts, you beat the Panthers, you beat the Jaguars, you beat the Commanders, you beat the Cardinals, you beat the Patriots, and then you beat the Seahawks. That's 8 of your non-divisional games. So I'm saying you'll still lose to the Texans, still lose to the Rams, still lose to the 49ers, but you're at 8 wins before you get into the NFC North. And then it's okay, 6 NFC North games. I don't think it's realistic to say the Bears would sweep the entire division, so you're not going to get 6 more wins to get you to 14, but could you go 3-3 or even 4-2? Because that would get you to 11 or 12 wins. To me, 12 wins is the absolute ceiling, best case scenario. Everything clicks in all the ways you could hope. 12 wins is the absolute ceiling. So 7 to 12 seem to be the boundaries for me of worst, and best. And so I end up finding myself somewhere in the middle. I think this is a 9 or 10 win team that pushes for the 7th seed in the playoffs, and maybe week 18 at Green Bay is the deciding game. If the Bears win, they're in. If the Bears lose, they're out. And maybe, I don't know what that means for Green Bay, or how that would work for their schedule, but it feels like it might culminate towards that. So like, if I had to go week by week, if I just like spitballing here, beat the Titans in week 1, lose to the Texans in week 2. Okay, 1-1. We'll say beat the Colts in week 3, lose to the Rams in week 4, 2-2. Beat the Panthers in week 5. Say lose to the Jaguars in London in week 6, you're 3-3. You go bye week. Then beat the Commanders in week 8. Beat the Cardinals in week 9. Beat the Patriots in week 10. So all of a sudden you're 6-3 on a 3-game winning streak. All right, season's going well. Then you run into Green Bay off of their bye week. I'm going to call that one a loss, even though it is in Chicago. But like, it's tough for me to Green Bay on a bye. I mean, and plus 4-game winning streak, including the division. Like, I'm going to go loss there, so we're 6-4. Then at home versus the Vikings, we'll go win there, so we're 7-4. On the road at Detroit on Thanksgiving, I'm going to call that's a tough one for me. I'm going to go loss here. I'm trying to be realistic here. 7-5. At San Francisco, loss. We'll go 7-6. So then at Vikings on prime time, like I'll be generous and say, okay, Bears are going to sweep the Vikings in this case. So that'll get me to 8-6 at this point with 3 games left here. At home versus Detroit, at home versus Seattle, and on the road at Green Bay. Like, I don't. It's tough for me to say, like, okay, the Bears going to get swept by Detroit. I could see it. You know, Detroit almost did it twice last year, but the Bears kind of had their number. Like, that's tough because I'm easily getting to, if I say beat Detroit week 16, then we're at 9 wins and 6 losses versus Seattle on a Thursday night game in week 17. I think the Bears should be able to beat Seattle. So that would go 10. And then Green Bay on the road in week 18 is going to be another tough game. And again, I don't expect the Bears to be swept by any of their divisional opponents, but I also don't know that I expect them to go 4-2 if you're sweeping the Vikings. So like week 18 at Green Bay feels like a Bears loss, but that still leaves you at 10-7 to end the season, which would be like absolutely a success. Whether you make the playoffs or not in that stretch, like that would be everything we would hope for and more in terms of Caleb Williams' rookie season. So like what it comes down to me is like, do you sweep the Vikings? And how do you split the series between the Packers and Lions? And then all the toss-up games, the Colts, the Rams, the Jaguars, the Seahawks. Like those are all games that I could see really going either way. And right now, they're probably all pretty close. And like maybe you split those games and go, I think what I listed 4 games, you go 2-2 in those 4 games. And like split those games, you split the easy and the hard games. And then it's like, all right, you're 500 with 6 division games in there. However you do in those division games determines whether you finish 10-6 or 9-8, et cetera, et cetera. Like that's ultimately what it's going to come down to is how they do in the NFC North. And we're going to find out really quickly in week 11, week 12, week 13, week 15, week 16. Like we'll know what the division rankings are pretty clean by that point because these teams are all playing each other, or at least all playing the Bears over that middle stretch of the season. It's an exciting schedule. I think no shortage of storylines in games. Week 1 is the Kevin Byard revenge game. Week 5 against the Panthers is going to be a DJ Moore revenge game. Week 3 at the Colts, the Matt Eberflus revenge game. Week 8 at the Commanders, Montez Sweat revenge game. And Week 17 versus Seattle, the Shane Waldron revenge game as well. So like a lot of familiar faces and foes for the Bears players on this team that, you know, we'll get to face their other team and maybe have a little bit more juice for those games that should only make them more exciting. Plenty of standalone and primetime games for us. They get Bears games on our television. So there's going to be a lot for us to break down each and every week this season right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. That's why you have to hit that subscribe button, whether it's on the podcast app that you use or if you're watching along the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, click that little bell and be notified when all of our video podcasts come out because that's the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for your second listen, check out Locked On's first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube and on the Amazon Fire TV app. Locked On Sports Today has 24/7 coverage of the top sports stories of the day with our local experts here in the Locked On Podcast Network. So find Locked On Sports Today, now available on YouTube on a live 24-hour stream or the free Fire TV channels app. Coming back tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Bears and another opportunity for you to bear down.